Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second in a four-part series, specifically for and created by internal medicine faculty in Phoenix. Today's session is Giving Effective Feedback by Dr. Jaya Raj. I'm Dr. Jessica Seaman, Assistant Dean for Faculty Development in Creighton School of Medicine. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Dr. Raj. This session is being recorded and you will have access to the recording and slide presentation for future reference. We invite you to ask live questions or submit them in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can by the end of the session. We do ask that you remain muted with video off unless asking a live question to assist us with the recording. Also, this session is eligible for CE credit, and we will share the activity code before we conclude. As a reminder, participation in all four sessions of the Internal Medicine series is required by your program leadership for this academic year. If you aren't available for the live sessions, you are asked to watch the recording, log in to CME Tracker, fill out the very short survey, and receive your participation certificate to email to your program coordinator. If there are questions regarding these requirements, please reach out to your program director or coordinator. Now, Dr. Raj, if you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Seaman, and thank you to everybody for joining us for today's faculty development session on giving effective feedback. This is actually a topic I really like talking about because I feel like I'm continually learning how to do this better. And so hopefully by the end of this session, you'll also feel like you're more comfortable giving feedback and feel you're able to do it better. You'll be able to describe the keys to giving effective feedback. You'll be able to explain the ask, tell, ask model of feedback and apply it to your educational setting. And you'll be able to utilize a feedback script, and you'll identify and overcome barriers to providing effective feedback to your learners. So I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible, particularly during the second half of the talk. And as Dr. Seaman said, I'm happy to entertain questions either during the presentation or at the end. So first I want to spend a minute talking about the difference between feedback and assessment. So feedback is meant to be a formative process. So it's where you give specific information to a learner about behaviors or skills that you've directly observed them perform. And the purpose of feedback is really to help the learner improve their skills. Assessment, on the other hand, is a summative process. So that involves measuring the learner's performance and comparing it to a standard, such as the milestones, for example, which we do very frequently. And the purpose of assessment is usually for grading or for informing decisions about progression. So assessments can be very high stakes, whereas feedback generally is not a high stakes situation. So what are the keys then to providing effective feedback? So we all know that just telling somebody that they did a good job is not an effective way to provide feedback. So there are a few things that we have to remember. First of all, feedback should be purposeful. And by that, I really mean that we should ideally go into every interaction with our learners with a plan and an intention of observing them and then giving them feedback. So it should be a planned activity. It should be goal referenced. So whatever you're going to observe and give the learner feedback about should be focused on one of the learning goals that either the learner identified or that you identified at the beginning of the rotation or whatever time frame you're observing them during. And this is really important. It should also be focused on observed behavior. So skills and things that you actually watch the person perform. So for example, if you are observing an intern talking to a patient or explaining something to a patient, and you see that they use medical jargon and the patient seems a little confused, then afterward, the feedback I would give the learner is that I observed that when you talked to that patient, you explained things in terms that the patient didn't seem to understand and they looked confused afterward. So you're really, again, focusing on behavior that you observed, not telling the intern that they were a poor communicator or that they're confusing when they talk to people. So that's an important distinction. Also, the feedback should occur in a timely fashion. So not necessarily at that moment or in front of people, but shortly after the observation has occurred. And so that way it's still fresh in everybody's mind. Also, you want to try to be as specific as possible. And so here's where examples are really important. And going back to the example I used about the intern giving feedback or giving an explanation to the patient, you can reference, that specific interaction with this particular patient, so they know exactly what you're talking about. And you might want to even give, be as specific as providing quotes. The feedback should, of course, be actionable. So it should be something that the resident or the learner can actually work on and improve. And finally, it should be concise. So you don't want to overwhelm somebody with a ton of feedback all at once. So maybe just giving them 1 or 2 points that they can take away is probably the best way. So just giving it to them in small, manageable bites. So let's talk about some feedback models. So you all know about or have heard about the feedback sandwich, right? And so I'm going to ask for some interaction here. And so the feedback sandwich is nicely illustrated in this cartoon. And so this is where you give a compliment and then a criticism and then a compliment. But what is wrong with the feedback sandwich? So tell me, what's the matter with giving somebody feedback in this particular way? And you can use the cartoon or you can use a different example. Oops, sorry. Anybody want to tell me?
You would only remember the negative things and expect them.
Yes. So that's really the main problem with it. So there are a lot of problems with what's going on in the cartoon, but just in general, with the feedback sandwich, people remember only the negative feedback that you've given them. They don't even hear and probably don't remember the positive. So they're really only focusing on the negative. So I wanted to offer you some alternative models that are in the education literature. One of them is the Pendleton model, and some of you may be familiar with that already, or maybe you already use it. But what that is, it's pretty simple. So it starts with asking the learner what they think went well, or what they think they did well. And then you tell the learner what you think they did well. You then, after that, ask the learner what they think they need to improve upon. And then after they've told you what they think, then you tell them what you think they need to improve. And so it's really a conversation. It begins with the learner identifying something that they think they did well, and then afterwards something that they did that needs improvement. And then you can reinforce whatever it is that you want to reinforce as far as, things they did well. And then you can also correct anything that they did incorrectly. So that's the Pendleton model. An alternative to the Pendleton model, which I actually prefer and typically use when I give feedback, is the ask, tell, ask model. So the ask, tell, ask, again, begins with asking the learner what they think they did well. And then you listen to their response. Sometimes they're a little reluctant to tell you what they think they did well, but I, just kind of remain silent and encourage them to think about it and tell me what they think. After they've responded, then I ask them what they think they need to improve upon or what they want to try to improve upon. And again, listen to their response. And usually they're a little bit more comfortable talking about what they want to improve on. And then after they've responded, that's when I tell the learner what my observations are. So I'll start with telling them what I think they did well. And then after that, I'll tell the learner what I think they need to improve on. And again, I try to be very specific. I use examples. I talk about things that I've observed, not things that I infer from what I've seen, or certainly not things that I've heard, but things that I've directly observed. And then finally, after I've told the learner what my observations are, then I turn it back over to the learner. So I put the ball back in their court and I ask them what they think about the feedback and what they plan to do to improve. And so both of these models, I think, are effective. They have a number of things in common. So one similarity is that they both begin with a learner's self-assessment. So the learner is required to do some self-reflection and then identify, again, both their strengths and their weaknesses. Both of the models identify both positive and negative points. So they involve a balance. They're also very much a conversation or an exchange of ideas. So it's not about you just, telling the resident what you think. It's really kind of hearing also what they think about their performance and, maybe giving you more information or, more context to explain some of the things they do well or some of the things they're struggling with. And then both models end with the learner taking ownership of their learning plan. So they have to come up, with your guidance, they have to come up with their improvement or action plan. So, like anything, obviously feeling really comfortable with this and getting good at giving feedback requires practice, lots of practice. And so I have this kind of sample script that I use or that you can use. And so we'll go through it and then we'll do some practice of our own. So first, you have to do some pre-work, right? So, you need to understand ideally where the learner is at or what their goals are. And you both should be on the same page and have the same understanding of what your learning goals are for that period of time that you're going to be observing them. And then you want to plan a specific day and time and place to give the learner feedback and give them a heads up that you're going to be giving them feedback at that time. All right, so then when the time comes to sit down and give the person feedback, you'll find a quiet place that's free of distractions. You'll sit down and then it's generally good to begin with telling them the purpose of the feedback. So you can say something like, the purpose of giving you this feedback is really to help you know how you're progressing so that you can learn and improve and get closer to achieving the goals that you stated you wanted to achieve during this rotation. So after stating the purpose, then you begin with your ask. So you can ask them what they did well. and listen to them respond. Ask them, what do you think you need to improve? And then listen to their response. Afterward, you can agree with what they've said. So most, I think, learners are pretty good about identifying what they did well and identifying where their gaps are. And so oftentimes, I just agree with them and I say, I agree with you. You did a really good job of explaining things to the patient in a way that they could understand. Or I agree with you. You seem to struggle a bit with your, with organizing your presentation or something like that. And then you can also add to their self-assessment. So if there's something that they themselves did not identify as an area of strength or an area for improvement, then you can tell them, I also observed. And then again, you can tell them something that you observed that maybe, they need to work on. Again, focusing on specific skills and behaviors. And then after you've explained that, some of the questions you can ask at the end would be, what are your thoughts about that? What's your response to the feedback I gave you? What do you plan to do to improve in this area or improve your skills? What questions do you have for me? Or, how can I help you improve with this? So those are just some sample statements and questions that you can use as part of your feedback.
Dr. Raj, we already have a question referring to a little bit more formal feedback that is sit down, we plan a time. And their question is, what are your feelings about written feedback versus just giving it to them verbally?
Okay. So written feedback, I think, so most of the time when we put something in writing, it's more of an assessment rather than feedback. So usually feedback is going to be verbal because it's meant to be a conversation. If you try to give the feedback in writing, it's difficult to really get the learner's response. So I think any type of feedback that you're giving in writing may be more similar to an assessment. And if for whatever reason you can't give the feedback in person or verbally, and you have to give it to the person in writing, and then, or in, a formal assessment, then I would maybe include in that assessment an invitation to the learner to meet with you or contact you so that you can have more of a conversation about it. So I think, a lot of the feedback that is given to learners or particularly residents in their evaluations, for example, they can find frustrating because it's usually received much, like after a long time has passed. They don't necessarily feel like they have an opportunity to ask more detail or ask for examples. Sometimes they don't understand the feedback. And so I think if you want to give somebody feedback, you could definitely put it in your assessment. That is helpful, but you want to really try to have a conversation with the learner as well. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Thank
you. Okay. So we're gonna then go into some practice scenarios. And again, I really want to make this interactive as possible on Zoom. And so we're gonna go through, I'll read through a couple of scenarios, and then I'm gonna ask you how you would approach giving this person feedback. And again, these are not real people, they're just based on real events. So scenario one, Dr. A is an intern on your service with whom you've been working for a week. It is her first week on the inpatient service. You have observed that she is often a few minutes late for rounds and her presentations are disorganized and sometimes lacking critical information. At times, she appears to be distracted by her pager or by doing small tasks when you're talking. During bedside rounds, she seems engaged with her patients. Her patients seem to respond to her in a positive manner. And so you arrange a time to meet so that you can give her some feedback. All right, so again, kind of, using what we've learned from the models, the ask, tell, ask model and the script that we went over. So how would you kind of start off with your feedback? Can somebody please volunteer? What would your opening line be?
What do you think you did well on this rotation?
Okay, yeah, so that's a good opening line. I would probably preface by just saying, well, thanks for sitting down with me. I want to give you some feedback so that I can, help you to improve. Or, the purpose of the feedback is to help you improve and kind of learn how you're doing. So yeah, so then you would ask, what do you think you did well? Good. And so, the intern would respond and maybe she'll say, well, I feel like I had a good rapport with patients. They seem to be really comfortable talking to me, and I enjoy talking to my patients. So that's just kind of an example. All right. So Dr. Moss, since you're on a roll, so what would your next line be? For anybody, it doesn't have to be Dr. Moss.
What did you think that you did?
Oh.
So go ahead.
I would after this, I would ask, okay, so what do you think didn't go well for you, or is there any area that you would like to improve upon?
Yeah, that's perfect. Right. So asking them, what do you think didn't go well, or what do you think you want to improve upon? And then again, ideally the person would hit the nail on the head, or they might not know exactly, but oftentimes in a situation like this, they know when they come to rounds unprepared and they have trouble getting everything together for rounds. So okay, so then after she has told you, I feel like, it's really hard for me to see all my patients in the morning. It's difficult for me to talk to them and then try to gather all the information, the labs and everything, and be ready for rounds. So then what would your next step be? So after she's finished talking, then what would you say?
I would say, yes, I did notice that you're struggling with your time. So let's talk about it. So what exactly is the area that you're struggling with? It might be not being familiar with the electronic medical record, some time management issues.
Good, yeah. So I love how you followed up your statement with saying, let's talk about it.
Yes.
Before telling her what, that you agree on what she needs to improve upon. So in the ask, tell, ask, I would first agree with what she said she does well. If you're doing Pendleton, then you would have already told her, after she said what she did well, what you think she did well. In ask, tell, ask, you would have just let her talk about what she did well, what she wants to improve upon. And then I would first tell her, yes, I agree. You seem to have an excellent rapport with your patients. They seem really comfortable with you. They seem to trust you. And I also agree that you seem to have difficulty preparing for rounds in the morning. So let's talk about that. Let's, what are some of the reasons that might be happening? So that's perfect. And then, after you've had this conversation and, ideally they've kind of given you more information that might make you give you more insight into what's going on with them, or, just more context. And then you'll, kind of acknowledge what they've said, and then you'll turn it back over to them, right? So then after they're done, kind of processing and you've told them what you think, then what will you ask them at the very end?
It's like, what are their plans for improving on those areas that we talked about?
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. And again, usually, most people are able to come up with something, and then you can also supplement that. You can give suggestions as well. And so that's really kind of how it works. Again, you can use either model. I really like ask, tell, ask, just because, I like to kind of hear everything that they have to say right up front and then respond to it. But you can use either, as long as you're starting with their self-assessment and then ending with asking them what they want to do. All right, let's go to the next scenario. So scenario 2, so you just started on service and you're working with a resident B for the first time. You have heard from others that he is lazy and unreliable, but you have decided to keep an open mind. During rounds, a resident B is able to present the patient succinctly and summarize the assessment and plan. After rounds, he disappears and does not respond to his pager or texts right away. When you check an hour or two later, many patient tasks, such as ordering labs, are left undone. The next day, you ask him about a patient's echo result, and he says it was done late the day before, and he did not get a chance to follow up on it. You look up the result, and then you see that the echo had significant, though not critical, abnormalities. All right, so this maybe a little bit more challenging. So, all right, so now, you've set a time and place, you're sitting down with resident B, and then how are you going to start off this feedback session? So what's the first thing you'll say? Anyone want to just start it off for us?
So I wanted to have a sit down with the residents, whoever their name is, and have a discussion in regards to, like, give a feedback in regards to, the specific patient that, we're talking about, or whoever the echo was on.
Okay, good. Yeah. So just saying, the reason I wanted to sit down with you is to give you some feedback on, how you've been doing the past couple of days. Good. All right. Thank you. And so then after you've stated the purpose, then what would you say next?
I would start with some clarifying questions.
Mhm.
For example, help me understand what your day looked like for you yesterday.
Okay.
I would start there, and then I would take the conversation into how is it that you feel your actions yesterday may have harmed or helped patients today? So I would go through some clarifying questions first to kind of see what's going on, because we don't want to judge somebody based on one day's worth of behavior. Now, because you did say that you're, quote, heard from others that he is lazy, we have to take that bias out of our minds, because we can only deal with what we have in front of us in that moment. And that's why you start with clarifying questions.
Yeah. So that's a really great point. So oftentimes, we'll kind of hear, from other people what their impressions of a resident is. And the problem with that, not only does that bias us, but also, lazy and unreliable are descriptions or characteristics. And, we don't really know that this person is lazy, or, we don't know what's going on, right? So there may be any number of reasons why this resident's performance was, what it was. So we don't ever want to make an assumption. And then when we're giving feedback, we definitely want to focus on actions or behaviors and not any kinds of like qualities or, things that we're inferring from the action. So asking about context, asking what their day was like, maybe what they were doing yesterday, things like that. I would, after clarifying or after telling the resident the purpose, I would still ask, I'd say, so what do you think has gone well past couple of days? And just kind of still start there, so that they're not defensive. And I'd say, what do you think you did well? What do you think has been going well past couple of days? And then, just hear what they have to say about what's going well. And hopefully something has been going well. In this case, it might just be that he was able to present the patients. He knew their assessment and plan, but that's something that I guess went well. And then, asking, what do you think didn't go so well yesterday? And then particularly if the person's not able to identify what they did incorrectly, then, really asking a lot of questions, trying to get more information is really helpful. So, in this particular case, let's just say the resident says, well, I feel like I'm pretty efficient seeing patients. So I think that went well. And I think rounds went well. And then when you ask, what do you think you need to improve upon? The resident says something like, well, I feel like my medical knowledge needs improvement and I need to read more. So they don't identify the issue with the echo as a problem or something that needs improvement. And so, maybe you've asked some clarifying questions like, well, tell me what was going on yesterday. But you'd want to then at this point tell them, right, like what you observed. So how would you tell them about this issue with the echo? What would you say to this person? So first you can agree, yes, I agree. I think rounds were, efficient and you were able to tell me what everybody's assessment and plan was. I agree, you probably want to read up on your patients more. And then you could say, and I would add that, when I asked you about that particular patient's echo, you hadn't followed up on that. And then you could say, what impact do you think that had on patient care? How might that have affected how we manage the patient, and just kind of had a discussion about that. So that's kind of making sort of an impact statement or asking them to reflect on how that might have adversely affected the patient's care. And so again, you're just asking them questions. You're not telling them that they're a bad resident. You're not telling them that they're unreliable. You're asking them to just reflect on it, and hopefully they'll be able to identify that this is a problem. So after you've told them about this particular issue, you've given them your observations, and then how are you going to end how are you going to wrap up this session? So you've just told the resident what you think they did well, what you think they need to improve upon, and then how would you wrap it all up? Is there like a question you could ask them, or what would you say at this point?
So what would be your plan to improve upon the issues that were discussed?
Yeah, Yeah.
going forward.
Good. Yeah, perfect. And then, yeah, so you could say something like, oh, what is your plan to improve? If it's something maybe like specific, you could say, okay, well, what can you do better next time? Or, what are you going to do differently next time? So things like that. And again, it's, pretty straightforward, and it's focused on actions, behaviors, skills, and not on, the person's character. There's no attack on them, and ideally, they're less likely to be defensive if they don't feel like their character is being attacked. All right. So another question in the. Oh. All right, so great. So thank you for kind of practicing those scenarios with me. Let's just talk about some of the barriers that we encounter. Obviously, if it were easy to give effective feedback, we wouldn't need to be doing this session on effective feedback. So what are some of the barriers that kind of get in our way when we know we want to give somebody feedback, or we should give a learner feedback? What kind of inhibits us from doing so?
I think nowadays it's mostly like you're hitting somebody's feelings when you're trying to give them feedback. It's usually like what kind of comes to my mind anytime that I'm trying to kind of give feedback to somebody.
Okay, yeah. So many people, many of us are, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And so, if we have some negative feedback to give somebody, I mean, it makes us uncomfortable, it makes us anxious, and we don't want them to, feel bad about themselves in any way. We're just trying to help them learn. And so we'll go through some of the kind of strategies for overcoming these barriers, but that's probably the most common, right? We don't want to hurt somebody, especially if we know they're trying. What other barriers prevent us from giving effective feedback? So I think, one of the other barriers that many people bring up is time. And so, obviously everybody's super busy. You have a million things to do. You're taking care of all these really sick patients, or you're in clinic, and, clinic's already run overtime. And so just lack of time can sometimes be a barrier. And so these are just some of the things that people have said in the literature. So again, commonly, makes us feel uncomfortable. We don't want to damage our relationship with the learner. Again, time. And then also there's sometimes people are afraid that if we give somebody negative feedback, that they're going to retaliate against us when they fill out their evaluation of us as faculty. And so people have brought that up to me. I can't say that doesn't happen. Sometimes it happens. I do think, though, that since I started using the ask, tell, ask, where really I'm just kind of asking them to tell me what they think, and most of the feedback is them telling me what they think or what they want to improve, and then me just kind of supporting them. I think they're a little less likely to get defensive or angry. It can get emotional, so having tissues handy is definitely useful, because they care so much, and so there may be tears oftentimes. But it's not necessarily that you've hurt their feelings. It's just that they care. It's important to them, and so they're emotional about it. But very rarely anymore does anybody get angry at me. They only really get angry if they don't think that you're trying to help them. But if they know that your intention truly is to help them, usually they're very appreciative. So, and so again, some strategies. So for the time crunch issue, planning a time and place. So, trying to anticipate when might be a good day to set aside some time, and then also anticipating how much time you think you might need. So if you know you're going to be short on time, you could plan to just give feedback on one specific thing or one specific interaction. You can also, rather than have one big feedback session at the end of the rotation, you could give feedback every few days and just focus on one thing each time. So that's another strategy. And then I usually don't give everybody on the team feedback on the same day. So I'll kind of spread it out and maybe give the students feedback one day, the residents feedback a different day, the interns feedback another day, and so on. And that's kind of how to keep it a little bit more manageable in terms of time. I think, again, beginning with a self-assessment and getting them talking first, and particularly getting them to identify their own gaps in knowledge or performance is really helpful in, helping to avoid that kind of, their natural maybe sense of becoming defensive or shutting down or feeling shame or anything like that. And then making it a conversation. So it definitely makes it less awkward, less uncomfortable if you're just having a conversation. If you're kind of, asking them questions, being curious, being supportive, and then ending on a hopeful note. So the nice thing, again, about these models where you ask them at the end what they plan to do, what their action plan is, or, what they're going to do to improve, gives them agency. So they always come away feeling, like there's something they can do. There's something they're going to work on, and it's not hopeless. So those are just some strategies to overcome some of the barriers that we all encounter when we're trying to give feedback. So what questions do you guys have for me?
Dr. Raj, Dr. Yanini.
Hi, how are you?
Good. What if residents intentionally or unintentionally lied to you? For example, with the hypothetical example with the echo result, what if the test wasn't done late as the resident claimed and whatnot? How would you approach that?
Yeah, so that's good. So probably, I would have asked them first, like what they needed to improve on. And ideally the resident would say, well, I didn't have the echo result when you asked me for it. Or, I said that it was done late, but actually when we looked at it, the result was already there or something like that. If they don't identify it and I have to identify it, then I'll just focus on the behavior. And I'll just say, well, when I asked you for the echo result today, you said that you didn't get a chance to look it up because it was done late last night. But actually, when I looked it up today, I saw that it resulted at 1 p.m. yesterday. And I just tell them that. And then usually they'll have to come up with a response. And so I think most times residents, if they give you misinformation, usually they're not deliberately lying, like they haven't premeditated a lie. It's just that they kind of feel caught or they're on the spot and, they get nervous and they just blurt something out. And so usually they're not intentionally trying to deceive you for the most part, but I will usually just say, just state a fact, and then I'll ask them to respond to that. And ideally, they'll respond, with honesty, and they might admit that, yes, they made a mistake, and then you can talk about, well, what are you going to do differently next time? So kind of moving from, their reaction and their shame or whatever, and then moving it toward, oh, what are you going to do differently next time? And then, that kind of gives them a way to be hopeful about improving in the future.
I have a question, Dr. Raj. Like the observation of the performance of interns and students can like be affected by how good the senior resident is. Like, for example, like if they don't have a good senior resident, like they might not have a good assessment plan, they might be like late on time. And the opposite also, like if they have very good resident, they will look like they're really good. So how can we tell like if they did something very well, is it because of the senior resident, or is it and also like the opposite? Like if they did something very bad, it could be because they didn't have a good supervision, and also like the resident was not providing like adequate help.
So that's a really good question. And that kind of goes back to the difference between feedback and assessment. So I think if you're trying to decide if, trying to kind of sum up an intern's overall performance over the course of, a week or a rotation or whatever, that's kind of more of an assessment where you're trying to figure out, okay, this is what I observed and what are some of the things that can account for that. For feedback, for example, if somebody doesn't have a good assessment and plan, I might tell the intern, when we rounded on, this patient, for example, and I asked you for the assessment and plan, you struggled coming up with an assessment and plan for that patient with a CHF. What are your thoughts about that? What do you think accounts for that? And then they might tell you, well, actually, the resident didn't go over that with me or something like that. Or they might give you some other reason or, provide some other context for it. But in the feedback, I'll usually just stick with what I observed, kind of state a fact, and then just try to gather some information from them, maybe ask some clarifying questions, as Dr. Zagoda said, and try to get some reasons that might account for it. But that's more for the purpose of assessment. For feedback, I'm just telling the intern, this is what I observed. This is something that, you need to improve. So what do you think you should do differently? And they might say, well, I should make sure that I talk to my resident beforehand or something like that. So that gives you information, and that gives them the information they need to know that next time they need to make sure that they clarify the assessment and plan with the resident, or that they talk to the resident before rounds or something. So that's how I would handle that situation. Is that helpful?
Definitely, thank you.
I'm just glancing at the chat to see if there's any other questions there. Any other questions, comments, feedback? All right. Well, thank you very much. As Dr. Seaman said, that this was recorded. So if you had to step away for a few minutes, or if you want to just go back and refer to it, it will be available for you, and you have the CME information up so you can get credit for this session. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raj.